In this reflection, I'm returning to 10 Theories of Human Nature by Leslie Stevenson and David Haberman, and I'm looking at the chapter on the Bible, where they address the three monotheistic world religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. In particular, I would like to look at passages that deal with the conception of the Old Testament God. So let's look at those passages in this book right now. Stevenson and Haberman tell us that the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, dates from the 11th to the 2nd century before the Common Era, and is recognized as the authoritative Word of God by both Jews and Christians. The shorter New Testament was mostly written in the 1st century of the Common Era and is distinctive of Christianity and not accepted by Judaism. Judaism today exists as a world religion developed not only from the Hebrew Bible, but from rabbinic tradition that compiled the Talmud from about the 2nd century of the Common Era. Christianity has had a continuous and complex history of development since the 1st century of the Common Era through the early church councils that formulated the creeds, the emergence of the papacy, the schism between Rome and Orthodoxy in the 11th century, and the Reformation of the 16th century. Early versions of Christianity still survive in Coptic churches in the Middle East and Africa and India today. The third great monotheistic world religion of Semitic origin is Islam, which originated in the Arabian Peninsula with the visions of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. Islam recognizes as forebears Abraham and a succession of Old Testament prophets leading up to Jesus, but claims that Muhammad is the last and greatest of the prophets, and that the Quran is the uniquely authoritative message of God, or Allah. The opening 3 chapters of Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible, tell of the divine creation of the whole world, including humans. In Genesis chapters 1 and 2 up through verse 3, the Hebrew word for God is Elohim, a plural form, whereas in the second version of the creation story in Genesis 2 verse 4, God is referred to as Yahweh, a singular form. Scholars have concluded that the book of Genesis has been put together from at least 2 sources. The Hebrew God, or divine powers, is an ex nihilo God rather than a god like Plato's demiurge in Timaeus. The ex nihilo God does not need to physically do anything in order to create. He just gives the command and calls everything into existence. The Hebrew God, then, is a language user who has conceptions of things before they come into existence. This God is the mental or conceptual power, then, behind everything. And at each stage of creation, we learn that the Creator God sees that what He had made was very good, which makes the fundamental point about the intrinsic goodness of all that exists, including human beings, before the fall, that is. The biblical God does not occupy a position in space, nor is He to be identified with the whole universe as the sum total of everything that exists. That is pantheism, not theism. God is said to be transcendent as well as immanent, although in some sense present everywhere and all of the time. God is not supposed to be like the unobservable entities, for example, atoms and electrons and quarks and strings, that scientific theory invokes to explain what we can observe through our senses. God is not a scientific postulate. The existence and actions of God are surely not empirical hypotheses to be tested by observation and experiment. And God is not a mere abstraction, like numbers and shapes and other objects in mathematics. The theistic God is supposed to be a personal being who creates us, loves us, gives us guidance, enters into agreements and covenants with individuals and nations, judges us, and may redeem or save us. God then is thought as a superhuman mind, endowed with the intelligence, knowledge, desires, and purposes, capable of anger, love, and forgiveness. But his significance is at least as much moral as it is cosmological. And belief in him is supposed to affect how we conceive of ourselves and how we ought to live our lives. Stevenson and Haberman tell us in this chapter that the Greeks put great store in the intellect, our ability to attain knowledge of truth, including moral truths. The highest fulfillment of human life was thought by Plato and Aristotle to be attainable only by those who gain such rational knowledge. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, on the other hand, great emphasis was put on human goodness, a matter of basic attitude, a matter of the heart rather than the mind or intellect. The concern for goodness in the Judeo-Christian sense goes beyond the conceptions of virtue offered by Plato and Aristotle, because the only firm foundation of human goodness is faith in the transcendent yet personal God. The idea here is that God created us for fellowship with himself, so we fulfill the purpose of our lives only when we love and serve our Creator God. Obedience, submission to God is more important than the use of reason or intellect and one's own judgments about truth and morality. Think here of the story of Abraham and Isaac in Genesis chapter 22. According to the Judeo-Christian tradition, what is basically wrong with humankind is that we misuse our God-given free will. We choose evil rather than good. We are infected with sin. Think here of the story of the fall in Adam and Eve. The point is that we are free, but there is a fatal flaw in our nature that makes us liable to the sinful misuse of our freedom. So the prescription is that we need God to forgive us and restore our relationship with God. We need salvation, made possible by the mercy, forgiveness, and love of God. The doctrine of original sin does not imply that we are totally and utterly depraved. It means simply that nothing we can do can be perfect by God's standards. Romans 3:23. The true nature of sin is mental or spiritual, according to Stevenson and Haberman. It consists of pride, the preference for our own selfish will over that of God's will, and this results in our subsequent alienation from God.